the premise for this session was that the next generation is really hungry for seeing our climate and ocean to be healthy. And as you all know, the climate has an impact on the ocean, but it's also true that the ocean, as you heard this week, offers many potentials for solutions. So the idea of this session is really to think about how we can co-design a gaming ecosystem that can both educate and inspire the next generation, but at the same time can provide a way for the next generation to envision their future, to provide feedback, to even perhaps provide those enlightenment ideas of how we can do things differently. And so really target also that as an asset for ocean solutions. Now, with the launch of the UN Ocean Decade, we have a great opportunity to create this ecosystem under the umbrella of the decade, where we ideally bring together gamers, scientists, science fiction writers, educators, and innovators to really bridge these boundaries and co-design something that really has high impact. So with that in mind, today's program is organized. We have 6 panel speakers that are going to give us different views from different perspectives, from science fiction writing to gaming industries, innovators, and so forth. And then we're going to have a little round table to really think about what does this gaming ecosystem look like? What are the challenges for really deploying that? And after that, the last segment of this session, we are going to announce a competition that some of our colleagues here have helped develop that really brings a sort of a Minecraft world to really how children co-design sustainable futures for the ocean. And I don't want to say more about that because I want to keep it a thing. So rather than trying to introduce all the panel members one by one, I'm going to introduce them as they speak. If you could bring the other panel members. Yeah.
Can you stop for a minute on that? They're working on it.
Okay. Yeah. So can John actually give his presentation? Okay. We're good. Okay. So our first speaker is John Pohl, who's graduated with a bachelor degree in oceanography from Humboldt State University in Arcata, California. He currently works at NOAA, but he's also a science fiction writer. And so he's going to set the stage for the session with his presentation. John, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, is everyone seeing my screen? Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. The world behind 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne was first introduced in serial between 1869 and 1870. Verne and his anticipation of important inventions, like advanced submarines powered by electricity from batteries or self-contained breathing apparatus, are legendary in both the science and science fiction communities. Verne is an exemplar in showing how, through stories and world building, we can develop innovations that in turn become reality. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was an influential book for me. It was one of the reasons why in 6th grade I decided that I would pursue a career in oceanography. And this is just a quick collage of my work and world as a NOAA oceanographer. Verne's work also kindled my interest in building secondary worlds. Today, I also write and publish science fiction and fantasy short stories under a pen name, and I'm a member of the Writers Guild Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. But how do my two worlds of scientist and science fiction writer fit together, especially in a way that's relevant to this gaming session today? Let's start with science. Foresight methodologies are helpful tools for scientific study design. These are systematic and creative processes that reflect, envision, analyze, and understand potential futures. And to that end, I like this foresight quote by architect Mark Childs. Now, world building within science fiction stories does the exact same thing, but with one difference. And see if you can spot that difference in this quote from author Ursula K. Le Guin. Childs on foresight is strictly objective. Le Guin includes an appeal through emotion and story. This difference between the two is key. As we talk about gaming tools to help educate and inspire students towards climate solution thinking, we can consider the tools of foresight as especially useful for sorting out what facts and models and concepts we might want to teach students to spur their thinking. But it is by wrapping futurist games within stories that we can help players to better understand and extend what they're learning. And this is because of the fundamental motivation of a science fiction writer. Now, the SF author's number one goal is to create an immersive, imaginative experience for the reader or viewer that's so vivid they connect emotionally to the author's creation and learn along with the story. This happens in a couple of ways. Through imagination. Good characterization and a compelling storyline helps the reader identify with the hero or heroine. They care about the character and their adventure. They empathize with them and want to see them grow and achieve their goals. And oftentimes, at a deep level, they want to see themselves as the protagonist. They want to dream big, have their actions matter. They want agency. Now, in exploration, quality original world building enhances a story through immersion, believability, and thematic exploration. These create a rich, engaging experience for the audience, and part of the fun within a story are the opportunities to dive deep and explore the background that might not be prominent in the story per se, but tease from the edges and encourage this exploration. Now, this power within story is important to human societies because it is the stories we tell ourselves that shape our values and which in turn shape the culture we choose to build. Now, what does this concept look like in action and how do we harness it to empower climate and ocean solution games? We can answer that by considering the story we want to tell, what we are telling ourselves right now when it comes to the challenges facing our environment. Now, according to the book, Active Hope, there's not one, but three stories in this moment. The first, dealing with the changing climate is just business as usual. Let's preserve the status quo, prioritize economic growth. Technological innovation and free market solutions will lead to prosperity for all. The dominant story emotion inspired by this is all is well. Nothing needs to change, and others will take care of any problems. The second story is the great unraveling. Coming at us like a freight train is irreversible social and ecological collapse, rising conflict over vanishing resources, and extinction. The dominant story emotion inspired by this is despair, doomism, apathy. Nothing we do matters. This does not lead to effective action. The third story is the great turning. It sees in our time the chance for deep societal change towards genuine sustainability and environmental justice. The dominant emotion inspired by this? Hope. Resolve, a feeling of purpose. Now, let's not argue over which of these stories is true because they're all manifesting in various ways, some more than others. The real question is, which one do we want to invent towards and strengthen? As the authors of Active Hope, Macy and Johnstone noted, the third story is where we will turn when we realize the first story is leading to disaster, but we refuse to despair and allow the second story to become our planet's fate. So let's harness the power of world building in science fiction gaming and reality within this third story. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to move to our next speaker, who is Alan Gerschnefeld. And Alan is the co-founder and president of the Eline Media, which is a developer of commercial social impact video games. In fact, Alan has worked on impact game projects with a variety of different groups, including the Gates Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Ford Foundation, NSF, the White House, and so on and so on. So we're really happy to have him on board as representing the gaming industry. Alan, if you want to take it away. Do you want me to play the presentation from the podium, or do you want to play it sharing your screen?
I can share the screen. Can you see the screen?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm involved as a co-founder of 3 different companies I think relevant to the conversation. One is Social Impact Video Games, and we recently did an ocean game. I'll show you a trailer in a second. Another is a world-building design agency, which builds on John's insights that he just shared. Our partner designed a movie called Minority Report, which is often known for its prescient vision of the future, and I'll share a short video on that. And then we do youth game design, which is yet another theory of change, because when the youth make a game about a subject, they become an expert in the subject. All building out from video games. So why video games? Clearly billions of hours of lean forward engagement, hundreds of billions of hours, literally around the world in every country. But if you go one step deeper, games let you step into different roles. You can take on and explore different identities, and within those identities explore different worlds and worldviews. You have agency, John mentioned this, you have agency to take on challenges. You are the protagonist. Games are about verbs, thinking verbs and action verbs. When you act, you can fail safely, often evocatively, often learn through failing. And crucially, you get feedback. You get feedback from the game, from the system, from peers, from mentors. And ultimately, you're accomplishing goals that you care about, sometimes individually, often collaboratively. That's behavior change, that's learning. But make no mistake, games are not an easy craft. It's an art form mediated by technology that is constantly changing. It involves a blend of programming, art, design, sound, music, storytelling. So just because it's a game doesn't mean it'll engage. Games have been democratized. Engines like Unity and Unreal and digital distribution have made it a lot easier to make and distribute a game, but it also means there's millions of games out there. So you're competing for discretionary time or dollars or both, or replacing time or money in the classroom, or augmenting existing programs. The context of the game is very important when you design a game. It's also a very fast-moving sector with different platforms, different genres, different business models. A social mobile game has often a very different business model than a PC console game. Games are also becoming services that don't end, which means you need a sustainable model, even if it's philanthropic or public interest. And lastly, and I think this will be interesting in the conversation, almost all future-facing games now are dystopian, and there's reasons for that. But it's not a good thing. It's a lot harder to create evocative, aspirational, but achievable worlds, and we can talk about that. So with that, I'm going to show two short trailers. Charles, if you want to show the first trailer, this is a game we did with BBC Blue Planet, Ocean X, and a bunch of amazing marine scientists.
Welcome to the Western Pacific. I'm Dr. Mirai Soto, and I'll be your eyes and ears on this expedition. I'm joined today by two colleagues.
Hello, I'm Andre.
And I'm Irina.
First time on a live stream. Be gentle with her. Oh, wow. Glad we didn't miss this.
Beautiful. Why are you so focused on this pod and the baby?
I'm hoping to follow the baby for years, to learn from her as she learns from her family.
Hello, Mariah. Thanks for checking in. Feeling settled in the sun? Has everything tested out?
Fabulous. The overhead speakers sound great. Glad I brought my tunes.
Science is not magic, it takes patience.
I'd like to believe in a little magic. Irina, did you expect volcanic activity here? Andre, who is messing with my whales?
And now I'm going to show you just a piece of a short video on world building. And in the conversation, I can talk about how we're marrying world building with future iterations of this ocean franchise. So Charles, if you could just play the experimental video. I don't think we're getting the sound.
Started on the same day. And so without a script, we had to develop a world. And that really changed my practice and launched world building as we know it. Minority Report became known for its accurate predictions of our present and future. It proved that imagining and portraying something that does not yet exist in the world was a way to actually enable it to exist in the world. We weren't being so clever, we were just listening well. If we're able to tell a convincing story that will immerse an audience in a completely different kind of outcome, and if we can thread this back into our present, and reveal the steps we have to take as designers, as media makers, as educators, as manufacturers, as scientists, to shift direction and move towards that vision. Then maybe there's an opportunity here to re-engage the idea that storytelling actually changes the world. Experimental is built on world-building design systems that are the foundation of our work. For industry, institutions, education, and entertainment, it's a powerful engine for change in every medium and platform imaginable.
In my 37 years of membership at ASCE, this is the most inspiring, motivating thing.
So I think we can stop the video there. It gives you a taste of world building, and we can talk more about it in the conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much for being with us and for your time. Moving forward, our next speaker is Lisa Jaschek from Georgia Tech. Lisa is a Regent Professor of Science Fiction Studies in the School of Literature, Media, and Communication at Georgia Tech, where she researches and teaches science fiction as a global language crossing centuries, continents, and cultures. Her ideas about science fiction as the premier story form of modernity have been featured in the Washington Post, Food and Wine magazines, the USA Today, and many AMC time series, including one from James Cameron's story of science fiction. Lisa, thank you so much for being with us. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Do we have my slide presentation?
Let me just pull them up.
Sure, thanks.
They'll be up on the screen in a second.
Okay, great. And if I can ask you to advance the slide.
Absolutely.
Such great power. I love it when you can tell someone else to do it. All right, hi everyone. I'm Lisa Jaschek, and I want to talk to you today about oceans in print science fiction as offering the kinds of hopeful narratives that John and our other presenters so far have been talking about, and Alex especially. So get ready, buckle your seatbelts. I'm going to take you through about 150 years of history in 5 minutes, so get ready. All right, so if we can advance the first slide. Next slide, perfect. So why print science fiction? It has to do with exactly the observations that you've been hearing from John and Alex. Often we feel like science fiction doesn't give us very many hopeful narratives, and I think that's because most of us get our experience of science fiction, our exposure to it through Hollywood film. And as cultural critic Susan Sontag noted back in the 1960s, the irony is science fiction films actually aren't about science, they're about disaster, right? But by way of contrast, as Ted Sturgeon reminds us, award-winning science fiction author in his own right, and working at about the same time as Sontag, a good science fiction story is actually going to literally dramatize human problem solving in relation to science and technology. So this is one of the reasons that I think print science fiction and associated long forms like graphic novels and even TV serializations are going to be the real places where we're going to get some exciting ideas for developing these kinds of educational and inspirational games. We can talk more about why that is during the conversation, but really quickly I'd simply point out that print media tends to be more long form and cheaper to produce than films, and so you don't have to get a return on your investment as quickly and play to the lowest common denominator necessarily. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So now I want to talk about, there's really 3 phases of oceans in science fiction, and each phase of storytelling offers different possibilities for game design, I think. So the first phase occurs from about the 1880s to the 1940s, and this is the period in which science fiction emerges as a distinct popular genre. And immediately, science fiction, even though it's looking, of course, at the stars in the sky, is also thinking about our oceans. And as John had mentioned earlier, we can thank Jules Verne for really kicking off that storytelling tradition. And we see that even this early, we have some of the same themes we're still grappling with today. So a lot of authors are writing about exploration and adaptation, and in particular, they're writing about adapting humans to ocean and other kinds of wet environments. At the same time, you do have some early science fiction authors who are beginning to explore pro-environmental and anti-colonial stories and thinking about the limits of capitalist exploitation of oceans. These are often early on, by the way, written by women who were associated with the first wave feminism and other social justice movements, as well as the early environmentalist movement. Next slide. The next phase comes from the 1940s to the 1980s, and this is the era when science fiction grows up, becomes the genre we all know today, and really becomes central to both the American and the global imagination. Not surprisingly, the space race kicks off a sort of new mini boom in ocean stories about exploration and adaptation, this time explicitly for the purposes of colonization. We also continue to see the development of more of critical but hopeful stories, exploring, continuing to think about environmental awareness and anti-colonial ideas. And in particular, one thing you see in this era is people who are starting to write these stories. You have both men and women starting to write pro-environmental science fiction, and they're often writing stories that dramatize interspecies relations. So thinking about dolphins and whales as the people of the sea and how humans can partner with them to build better futures. Finally, today we're in what I think is frankly the most exciting phase of science fiction, and not just because we're living in it. New slide? Thank you. And this is, since the 1980s, we've seen a real explosion in stories about oceans. It's become, I'd say, one of the major themes in science fiction today. And I think that this has occurred in part because new communications technologies have fostered a new environmental awareness, and it also allows science fiction authors from around the globe to share their stories with audiences in absolutely unprecedented ways. One of the cool things that we're seeing now is that stories are, that authors and artists are looking at diverse scientific and storytelling traditions that multiply our understanding of our relations to the oceans and the different kinds of solutions we might employ to foster both its and humans' well-being. And in particular, the one thing I find really fascinating right now is that whether you're talking about authors who are working in traditional forms of either hard science fiction or feminist science fiction, or artists who are working in some of our newer speculative traditions, including queer, indigenous, and BIPOC traditions. Also, authors working in graphic novels. Victor Laval's Eve is actually a graphic novel. That these authors are, no matter what traditions they're writing in, one of the things we're seeing as a common thread in storytelling now is the need to rethink the relations of nature and infrastructure. That historically we've thought about infrastructure as something that needs to keep nature out or separate from us as humans, and that a lot of the new solutions that are being imagined in science fiction really imagine reorganizing that and thinking about how nature and infrastructure can coexist and thrive together. All right, so that wraps my talk up, but really quickly, I'm just wondering, can you just flip through the next slides while I'm doing my closing comments? There's like 6 more slides. You can flip through them. I just want to make a point here that when we were talking before this panel, someone had mentioned that it's hard to find hopeful science fiction stories. And I thought, no, I think they're out there. So I had sent a call out through social media, and the call went around the science fiction community and then jumped to the comic book community. And what I'm giving you here is a list of all the stories that were emailed to me and texted to me and phone called to me and sent over to me in like a 24-hour period before this presentation. Well, let's go back to the end with the so long for thanks and all the fish. So anyway, I just wanted to make the point, there's a lot of hopeful stories out there. If you're interested in learning more, I'd be happy to share this slide deck with you, and otherwise, so long and thanks for all the fish.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Let's move on to our next panelist. It's Robert Riepy. Dr. Riepy is currently the Executive Director of the University of Nevada's Blackfire Innovation Hub. The Blackfire Innovation Hub brings one of the top nation's research institutions to incubate and accelerate problem-solving innovation. And with that, I'll pass it to Rob.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone from a very sunny Las Vegas. I'm delighted to be sharing this opportunity with my colleagues who happen to be sitting on the platform, Karen and Les from Stride. We have been working, and I've been collaborating with Stride on a very unique opportunity in game-based learning. Stride is a fantastically innovative education company, and I'm delighted and honored to be working with them. But one of the elements that I've been focusing on in this game-based learning execution is the construction dynamic of the game. In other words, the purpose of the game. We've seen some brilliant examples this morning about games and developed games. They're just stunningly beautiful. From a game-based learning perspective, the game has to have an outcome, not just the completion of the game, but in Stride's perspective, a learning objective. That, let's say it's a 7th grade science class, that there's a learning objective for that class. And how can video games enable the students to attain those objectives? The second constructive outcome is a real-world problem. So solving a real-world problem, such as indicated to our oceans, this connects those two things, the real-world problem with the learning objective from a 7th grade science class. And these are terrific ideas. This is a great way to kind of redefine the future of education and how it's presented to children. One of the things that we know about games, and these prior examples are brilliant examples of that, is that games engage students, they engage children, they engage adults, and that engagement happens in many different ways. Some is just because it's a game, the gamification of it, things like points and badging and socializing. But one of the unique elements in game-based learning is the ability to link across disciplines, to look at science and link that with composition, to link that with mathematics, to create a multiple level of learning in students. And I'm delighted that we are working on this project. One of the really unique aspects of this project is that Stride selected a university to assist in developing it. So we actually have university students working on the design of a game, almost the peer group of the students who are going to be playing the game in middle school or high school. It's not too long ago that those students were in those positions, so they do recall. So they know what it was like as being a sophomore in high school trying to learn science and, you know, struggling through it or breezing through it, or whatever the case may be. But they also know how effective a game could be at learning it. So I think the idea of students creating games for students is really unique and very profound on the part of Stride. I think that, you know, this of course is just one application. I hope that this extends to many more, but it enables us to kind of achieve the many different societal goals, such as raising awareness, increasing involvement, and ensuring that that generation, the younger generations who are learning in middle school, elementary school, or high school, are not only getting exposed to the information and learning about it, but they're taking an active role in solving it by creating their ideas and completing a game. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We're going to move to our next panelist, who is Les Ottolenghi. Les is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information and Technology Officer for Stride, which we just heard. He has a remarkable 30 years career designing and implementing digital service strategies. And at Stride, Les is leading the company into a new era of IT solutions, which includes this platform that Rob just mentioned, this game on Minecraft, which we'll hear about more. Thank you, Les.
My slides. Perfect. Well, good afternoon. Who plays games? Yeah. Okay, I'll hear some claps around League of Legends. Anybody play League of Legends? How about Fortnite? Anyone in your family play Fortnite? Okay. See, what's great about what we just heard is the games. Now, it is about the gamers. Because if we're going to have impact with ocean vision, we have to have the gamers pay attention to the games. So at Stride, we focus on the gamer. We're a K through 12 education platform who looks at the world as a way to be applied through learning, meaning that the education process should be applied somehow and as close as possible to real time. Judging by the number of young people in the audience, how much patience is there to go for 12 years, another 4 years, and maybe another 2 years to actually do something that you spent time learning. I would suggest, since I have a 15-year-old who plays 3 different games, is a highly ranked esports athlete, is looking at a scholarship to go to college through esports, so competitive video gaming, that he has no patience to wait for 24 or 26 years in order to have an impact on this world. Now, the picture that you see here is Martin Gray, who is the head of marketing for this incredible institution that we call the Georgia Aquarium. He was also a visionary for this program. He was a personal mentor of mine, he was a boss of mine, and he was a close friend. He unfortunately passed away at the end of last year before we could make it to this conference. But he was instrumental in bringing stride to this institution and to this opportunity to educate young people through games in applied learning and in a way that allows for education to now become the forefront of what we do to change the world. My son is fond of telling me, "Dad," and he says this with respect, "my generation's going to have to fix all the things that you broke." It's kind of a joke, but it's not really, right? It feels like what people of his age are thinking. And why is that important? Because their world is dominated by gaming. If you look at the activity around this world globally, and you think about what people do, the one leisure activity that is foremost is gaming. If you take competitive video gaming in the United States alone, it makes more money than Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NFL combined. That is where the attention is. The attention is on gaming, and the gamer is there, and that is who we have to address. We have to find a way to get their attention through games, through all the wonderful things you just heard, including the storytelling, which is remarkable, by the way. That was just like off the charts. And when we look at the world of grabbing that attention, we have to address the gamer straight on. Why? They live in this world. In fact, to Dr. Rippey's point, many of the people creating games were gamers. Ultimately, they weren't just storytellers or writers. They were actual enthusiasts. And when we survey parents for our 200,000 plus students at Stride, we see that over 70% of them game with their child every week. And over 75% of them believe that if their child games, that will lead to a better career and a better life and having positive social impact. So games are the gateway, and the gamers are key. Their behaviors are key. And how is that in terms of outcomes? Well, if you look at graduation rates, or even just dropout rates, if a child is playing competitive video games, their dropout rate drops to 8%. That means 92% graduation rate for somebody who plays competitive video games. Games have a positive impact. And if we're putting it in the context of what we're talking about now, the purpose of finding a way for coastal rehabilitation or education of climate science, this has to be the gateway because it is where the attention is. And in fact, the World Economic Forum will tell you that somebody who is networked together, someone who is connected through a device, who works in teams, who does real-time problem solving, who becomes a citizen scientist, is the person who's going to dominate the skill sets of the 21st century. The form and the definition and foundation for our gaming platforms is around this notion of being a 21st century leader. Proper education to change the world. Proper education to be a productive citizen. And ultimately, somebody who can affect not just the present sort of economic outcomes, to the point about capitalism. Where does capitalism go? I would suggest that a business leader today needs to be a really good science fiction storyteller in order to properly change the world. So if they have the skill sets and they learn through these gaming platforms, all the ways they can connect and solve problems by doing it in practice. They can do that in the real world with others and do it at a rapid pace. We find that with our students, we over-index, we're about 17% on the LGBTQ community, that we have greater socialization through games. And through that socialization, problem solving, understanding, coherence, competency, all the things that create the word empathy and truly solve problems, because it's through understanding and education and empathy that we get anywhere as a society. And the remarkable thing is, games are accessible in any form. We offer camps and classes through this applied learning approach that Dr. Rippey talked about, and you'll hear more from my colleague Karen. And we offer immersive curriculum, all of which is focused at this point when we talk about this particular program on the climate science, on the coastal preservation and restoration. And we'll have something more to talk about here in just a few minutes in this area, because we're making it available to everyone who attends this conference, all of our partners. But one of the things we found is that in order to be effective, we have to go where the gamers are. So I'm assuming everyone has heard of Discord. If you haven't heard of Discord, well, you need to learn what it is. And anyone under the age of 50, I'm pretty sure, knows what Discord is. It's not a jab at a certain age demographic, but that's where the kids are. That's where they live online. We had the ability to address about 2,000 students when we started this program a year ago. We now have the ability to address 350,000 just by going to Discord, doing the right thing, offering gaming tournaments, offering this kind of education through an environment where the actual student, the gamer, is. And ultimately, we do these things in person. Here's some pictures from the Clearwater Aquarium. This occurred 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. We did it in person, extraordinary attendance. This was something that Martin Gray had set up for us. And ultimately, it's the way that we think, if you look at the online and offline world, where the intersection is, right here in these institutions, these aquariums, where you can address an audience, not just to come through and take a look at the whales, but actually learn as much as they possibly can. And when they go home, take that with them. Be able to be engaged all the time in the process of learning and creating solutions, which I would argue from a demographic point of view, and if you take a look at the survey we have from our camps and classes, is exactly where this generation of gamers wants to be. When we hold camps and classes for teaching, learning, and education, we get over 85, over 90% positive number of returns. Apparently my watch is calling me right now. Sorry, can't talk right now. That means that if we address the gamers properly with the right content, we can get positive outcomes. So this is a program, when you think about gamification and gamified learning, which by the data says it will work. Now we all have to do is get together, provide that content, and then push it directly out to the audience that wants to consume it, is willing to consume it, and will consume it. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Thank you so much for those wonderful remarks. And our last panel speaker is remote. Her name is Jennifer Estares, and she is game director at Us2 Games, which is a B Corp known for the architectural illusion adventure Momentum Valley, and the conservation-focused game Alba, a wildlife adventure, which has planted over 1 million trees, one for every download. So Jennifer, if you are online, please take it away. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me, and do you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Oh, fantastic. So yes, I'm here in Sicily, and I'm surrounded by over some of the videos I wanted to show. I'm happy to share. Email me. You see my email here. Maybe I'll share one video. And if my connection isn't coming through, let me know and I'll move inside. Yes, I'm a game director at Us2 Games. From Cybo, Nick. my MFA in creative writing from Columbia University, and I grew up in Atlanta, so I know the Georgia Aquarium very well. I'm a mom of a hardcore 9-year-old gamer, and I am a climate justice activist, active in Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Playing for the Planet, which we'll talk about a little bit, the IGDA Climate SIG, and the newly formed Game Dev Rebellion. So as I mentioned earlier, us two games where I work, we're known for these story-heavy games like Netflix, to the memories between, and so Alba Wildlife Adventure is a game about nature conservation and how even the smallest person can make a difference. It started off as a bird watching game and it expanded into this open world explorer. And eventually in the game, you take down the evil capitalist, think of it as a Greta Thunberg trainer. Then we partnered with organizations like Ecology. So we plant a tree for every download of the game. And so far we've planted over 1 million trees. And we're thinking about, the equivalent for the unseen oceans. Looking at a lot of games like Alan. The other game we're known for is Monument Valley with over 100 million downloads. And it's this illusion puzzle adventure full of the sterile, lonely architecture. So a few years ago, we joined this organization called for the Planet, which Alan's team, spearheaded by the United Nations Environment Program and game industry leaders from console, PC, and mobile gaming, and has over 41 studios. So we focus on decarbonization and, more relevantly, the annual Green Game Jam, where game studios add sustainability initiatives into their games. And Green Game Jam, there are a lot of talks, and they're quite inspirational. And this one, it was by Peter Wolleben, the author of The Hidden Life of Trees. So he gave his talk in the forest. His book is nonfiction, but it surprisingly reads like a fairy tale. It's about how trees communicate, caring for each other, the trees as storytellers. And we wanted to tell this story in Monument Valley too. So we worked on a new chapter for the game. It's called The Lost Forest, and we began and end with a call to action to sign this play from world leaders to protect forests. It's an emotional, poetic, emphatic appeal, not dystopian. I think let's see if this trailer works when you go to world. Let me know if it's streaming. Yes? Is there any audio coming through? No.
Sometimes it's broken up, but please try to proceed. Oh, this
Okay.
audio of the game is not coming through. Sorry.
Okay.
And now also your
I'll
audio.
go on to the next slide.
Thank you.
So, all good? Yeah. I'll end with this quote then, which is said by Maria Sanz, our CEO. If you want to tackle sustainability, you need more than science and tech, because we've had those for years. What we really need to do is change hearts and so as game developers, we are in that business of changing hearts and minds, and we're ready and eager and already making a difference. I'm game directing the next Monument Valley, looking at marine and coastal settings. Thus, I need to keep afloat of these current trends on ocean climate solutions. So,
okay. Thank you, Jennifer.
Just excited to be here. And then a final note, activists, I do want to end with a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We are about to begin our panel discussion, but before that, I wanted to invite Karen to show a little preview of this beautiful world game that was built for the Ocean Decade.
Thank you so much. When Stride started talking with the UNGOS group at Ocean Visions, we set out to create an opportunity for our students to really get involved and to learn about how they can impact ocean climate. So we've created, in partnership with the UNGOS and Ocean Vision, this great game that our students play. So if we could play the trailer.
Welcome to Rehab Lab, a newly formed sustainable ocean city. Come join our team of experts who've dedicated their lives to nurturing and protecting our oceans. Your first challenge is taking on the battle against plastics in our waterways. Guide the plastic recovery boat through the estuary to collect all the plastic heading into the ocean. You'll learn about the most common plastics removed from the water and how we can prevent them from getting into the water again. On your way back to the lab, rescue a sea turtle and bring it back for emergency care and rehabilitation. The next task is to collect mysterious pollution in the water that is threatening our entire marine ecosystem. Collect all the pollution to restore the ocean quality and deliver samples back to the lab. You'll learn the source of several types of ocean pollution and how to prevent it from coming back in the future. Even though we moved as quickly as possible, our coral reef has suffered serious damage. You'll learn how coral reefs are being restored by clearing out the dead coral and planting healthy new coral. This is a difficult process, but you'll get some training before you head out to restore the reef. When that's done, our ocean will be on the road to recovery. After completing all your challenges, you could turn your focus to helping us build our sustainable ocean city. What do you think is needed most, and how will you build it? We can't wait to see what you create.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so we tried to plan this session to have plenty of time to actually have a chat. If we could bring our online panelists on the screen, because we really have a really diverse group of panelists today, and so I want to start with the first question, and then we'll also have a question from the audience. But to the panelists, what do you think an ocean gaming ecosystem for the UN Ocean Decade should look like? And what could be the benefits of creating or co-designing this as a sort of a multi-sector activity between gamers, science fiction writers? And so who would like to take the first? Bless, do you want to go first? Could we have the panelists on Zoom, or are we having technical issues? Okay.
So I believe your question is, now, how can we effectively propagate through gaming across broader society, right?
Under the UN Ocean Decade, yes.
Yeah. One of the things, and some of the co-panelists here are probably more qualified specifically to talk about this, but the mention of Unity and Unreal. So when you think about technology and how it spreads, if we didn't have an iOS, or we didn't have an Android operating system or Windows, we probably would just have a diverse number of different systems and devices that don't interconnect. The effectiveness of anything is what is essentially called the network effect. And that network effect talks or speaks to the very foundation of any operating system that works with one device to the next. The more that we can interact between individuals and then machines or devices, the better. Meaning that if we had an operating gaming platform for the UN initiative, for coastal rehabilitation, for restoration, for climate science, in essence, an operating platform so that all of this information can be distributed vis-a-vis games and then other information that links to those games outside of the walled garden of the game, back into any information, including things like generative AI. Then we would have a way for every citizen to not just learn, but participate in creating the qualified solutions which will restore our oceans. And I think as big an ambition as that sounds, it's not that far away. It's within arm's reach. And it is something we should dedicate ourselves to so that everyone around the world has access to this information. And then, like you just saw in that game, can see a positive outcome from just anything they could do personally. That kind of coalition of thinking, of heart, mind, and spirit, is what will bring the solutions.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask maybe one of the on Zoom speakers to provide their comment. Anyone wants to go?
Sure, I'll go. Can you hear me?
Go, Alan. Yes, loud and clear.
So just to build on the last comment, a few things that we've been thinking about. The idea of being in a virtual world, having agency in games, as I mentioned, you're constantly having challenges and getting feedback and leveling up to more challenges towards goals you're invested in. If we want that to cross over to the real world, I think what great initiatives like Jennifer described and Playing for the Planet are doing scratch the surface, because you do an action like you plant a tree. I think the next step is to get the feedback that my agency made a difference individually and collectively, and then I get another action, or we collectively get another action towards a vision that we're collectively invested in, which comes to the science fiction in terms of a collective vision that we all aspire to. And having those feedbacks cross the virtual space and the real space is very, very hard. There's a lot of interesting initiatives around the world exploring that. But having that be sustained as a service versus a one-off is one area that I think is interesting to explore. A second, if you look at what's happening in Hollywood and on the business side of gaming, you're seeing a lot of consolidation and transmedia. So you're getting large subscription services like the Netflixes and the Disney Pluses, and you're seeing this with the Microsoft purchase of Activision, where there will be a series of subscription services where you can watch a movie, watch a TV show, play the game, and these services want to sustain that engagement, get new subscribers and keep subscribers. I think that's an opportunity for the impact space. The idea of creating worlds, they call it the Marvelization of Hollywood, rich worlds where you become invested in characters in the world, and you can go from a TV series to a game, perhaps a game as a service, perhaps a game as a series, with an embedded citizen science platform that can scale to tens of millions, educational programs. So rather than a bunch of one-off projects, which aren't bad and are critical, or I would say in addition to those, thinking about some larger scale visions that can also cross over to the real world. So those are two thoughts.
Thank you. And I want to return to our in-person panelists, Lisa, from the science fiction perspective.
Well, John just took my thing about transmedia storytelling, so well played. But I actually want to loop back to something Les had said that I think that's really important, which is the idea that these games can't be just self-contained, that they have to lead you back out to education and action outside in the world. And it occurs to me this is already happening in some kinds of independent gaming. And one great example is if anyone knows Elizabeth Lepense's Thunderbird Strike, which is a side-scroller game. You can just go download it for free online. Anyone can win it in 20 minutes, and I think that's really, really important. It's very liberating, even for occasional gamers, and that's something we haven't talked about, is occasional gaming here. But the cool thing is, the game is, Elizabeth Lepense is an indigenous game designer and environmental activist, and in the game, you are a Thunderbird protecting Turtle Island from oil excavation. And it's exciting, and you get to collect lightning and zap things and bring your people back to life. And you win in the end, and as you win, it leads you back out to real world actions you can take. And they're like, if you had fun playing this, why not try to make this kind of change in the real world? And through sort of low-hanging fruit, like write this letter, read this website, that kind of thing. And that strikes me as so important. I'd love to see that scaled up to the kinds of game environments and ecologies we're talking about here.
Thank you. Returning to our online speakers, does anybody want to add a comment on this thread?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing following up on what Les was talking about on the network effect. And this was a particularly insightful moment. As I mentioned, we've been working on a game with a group of university game devs. And one of the things that came up was the common technology that students anywhere may have access to, and how what is the baseline of technology, which could be quite low by today's standards of their connectivity and their equipment. And so Stride is able to help these students understand that for the network effect to occur, you have to be able to reach all students. And those students may be disadvantaged and may not have access to high-speed internet, or they may not have the latest laptop upgrade. They may have a very slow, aged laptop. So the students were very interested in understanding how that blends into the game design, that they may be serving up the game to a student who has relatively old technology on a slow connection. So the game still has to work. It still has to create the network effect that Les was talking about across all types of technology, particularly in this. I thought that was rather insightful to, on part of Stride, who is an expert on this, to share with these developers.
Thank you. Jennifer or John, do you want to add anything?
I just wanted to pick up on what Robert was saying, not only for the disadvantaged here in the global north, but also thinking about people in the global south and them being able to access these games and play those games. Quite important. for games like the ones that we make at us2, it's really important that we are approachable, that we're accessible, and that anyone can play them. I think free-to-play games have its own problems, but they're also just available and they're free. And would like to explore how can we make those games, those free games, just as educational, just as powerful as the ones that are more premium.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Yeah, riffing off of all of these excellent points, I think that in terms of looking at an ecosystem, it extends from a story standpoint, not beyond just the tech availability. I think that, it's important to think globally but act regionally from the standpoint of the stories, because different regions tell different stories. The game players and game developers will relate to different concepts, different stories. The different elements of science that perhaps needs to be promoted will vary by region. And so I think taking all of those into consideration will augment the specific game development considerably and improve its accessibility and improve its engagement with regional audiences.
Thank you. So I come from the science world, and I've had the happiness of introducing these platforms in several audiences in the research and scientific world, and everybody gets super excited at the potential. And so the question comes, how can scientists really get involved? Where is their place for contributing to this? I've heard Alan talk about these dystopian worlds that are a little bit untethered from the real science. Is there a space for us to really create a world that is a video game world that is closer to the science, but yet has that vision from the science fiction world? And maybe I'll start with Lisa.
Yes, I just gave you 150 years worth of stories that do this. So right now, as some of you might know if you're science fiction fans, there's been a lot of talk for the last couple decades about hope punk, right? And hope punk is storytelling that doesn't whitewash the world or paint or downplay our problems, but instead directly acknowledges them, but insists that, as we were saying, I think it's the turn that John was talking about, right? This idea that we can be hopeful, we can work together, and that there are communal solutions that can move us towards these better futures. So those stories are out there. Again, the problem is most people are not exposed to them because most people get their science fiction through Hollywood. And blockbuster films have a very different imperative than other kinds of science fiction storytelling. They're there to make money and to appeal to the largest audience. So that means I don't go to a Hollywood movie to get educated, quite frankly, right? Like, you go to be entertained. And if education happens, awesome, but it's never the first priority. I think that looking at other art forms that really reach that platonic idea of education and entertainment might provide those narratives.
And we'll come back to this point of how do we actually raise above the noise and engage this community. But is anybody online would like to comment about the role for scientists to contribute to the gaming ecosystem?
Well, I guess I can mention, with the game trailer that I showed, we worked very closely with marine scientists. I think many of you know them, Dr. Mandy Joy, Dr. Sylvia Earle, Dr. David Gruber. These folks are remarkable. I look at them as amazing aquanauts. And a lot of what we want to do when we design the game is we start with the real world inspiration, and then we find the verbs, the game mechanics, the worlds that will engage. And there's a lot of theories of change we're juggling. I do think movies and video games have a very powerful influence on people, even if they lead with entertainment. Gina Davis's research on television and now video games on how a protagonist in a TV show or a world inspires careers. We heard it in these talks. I think John started by talking, whether you read a science fiction book, watched a movie, or played a game, it inspires many things. SimCity inspired city planners. We've had people tell us that they've inspired to go study marine scientists. That's just one theory of change. I think jumping off into the real world engagement, like the citizen science and things like that, is another theory of change. All of this is done working closely with scientists. The key is to find the right partnerships. The scientists who want to lean in and understand games. These games take a while to develop. They're complex. There's lots of twists and turns. And finding game designers that deeply care about the impact, and they have the craft to lead with entertainment, but the passion to integrate the science. So if you can put the right teams together with the right financing, all of the things that we've discussed is possible.
Does anybody want to add a comment on that, or can we move on to the next question? Yes,
I'll
John.
add a quick comment, Manu. You know, science is only as effective as it is if it's communicated well, right? It's not enough just to do the research, but to actually share it as well. And I think that at least my experience in teaching myself to write and publish in the science fiction world, it has really been a great education in terms of trying to make science more accessible. And so I think there's really a connection, a potential connection there, where scientists can learn better communication skills by learning the practices of story and the key components of narrative. I mean, science itself, it's at its most fundamental level, it's a problem solution dynamic. You see a problem, you know, this is what I did to try and correct the problem, and this is what happened. That's essentially a story arc right there. And so I think that can be lifted both from science fiction and entertainment and shared within the science community better.
Thank you, John. Yes, somebody says anything? Yes, go ahead.
I just want to second what John is saying. We do Imagineering events at Georgia Tech where we bring scientists and science fiction authors together to, you know, think outside the box and try to come up with agendas that might not practically seem to make sense in terms of the kinds of limits people often have on the need to get funding and to make things actually happen. But sometimes the Imagineering sessions really do lead to these interesting and productive collaborations. So maybe that's another thought, is how do you bring both scientists and science fiction authors together with game developers, right, to have that kind of synergistic energy.
Thank you. While we continue with another question, the audience, you know, your time to ask question is coming. So if you want to formulate your thoughts and get ready, I'll call on you in just a few minutes. I guess the last sort of setup would be, what do you see are the challenges to develop a gaming ecosystem like this under the UN Ocean Decade? And also, how do we raise above the noise? How do we actually reach our audience? And perhaps, is our audience only the children, or are we trying to do more? Very loaded question. Go ahead, Les.
I'll start with the answer. Average age of gamers now is rising. So I think we can get above the noise and we can address a broader audience on a global basis. 5.5 billion of these out in the world, which people play games on every day. So that interconnectivity is effectively in our hands and in the audience that we want to get to's hands. The difference here is, you know, I won't debate sort of the existential question of the economics, but above the noise is a sense of knowledge capitalism versus financial capitalism. Financial capitalism has its own sort of view of what is a return on investment, whereas a collective view of the world in terms of a healthy ocean or a healthy environment is probably more leans towards knowledge capitalism. That education through games, directly through one of these, is much more powerful and is accretive, has a greater value than any amount of money sitting in a bank account. Someone saying something? Sorry.
I'm not sure. If we could try to put on mute all the participants. Thank you. Go ahead, Les. Sorry.
I think that sort of sense of the getting above the noise for the ecosystem is hearts and minds immediately where people are accessible. And I think the idea of transgressing, just going beyond sort of the boundary of the game, your point of how does it interconnect, all these things are extraordinarily scalable. And those are also deeper connections, ultimately, when you look at it. People have a favorite game. They have a favorite app. If they had to choose between losing this or their child, they might be like, I'm not sure, you know? So, you know, they think about things very much at heart for how they're connected. And that's how we get above the noise.
Thank you, Les. Any of the people online want to comment on that? And the first person from the audience who wants to ask questions, please come to the microphone. Jennifer, if you're trying to say something, you're on mute.
Am I still unmuted?
No, we can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of the challenges when you were talking about the gaming ecosystem, obviously it's time. Some games take a month, but most games, especially the bigger ones, take years. We've been in dev for a couple of years now and thinking about money. But there's something that one of the panelists mentioned, which made me think about the audience and how, yes, it's about the younger audiences, but it's also about the younger audiences and the older audiences interconnecting and thinking about cross-generational gaming and getting people to play together and have the dialogue together. And would be nice to figure out, besides family gaming, what other ways can we do that?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to cut off this thing because amazingly we have a whole bunch of questions here that we need answering. So please go ahead.
I don't know. Okay, oh, cool. Hi, thank you. Kind of also building off of that last point of the intergenerational gaming, some of the thing I had noticed in the slides is saying that like 41% of the Twitch viewers are in that 8 to 18 range, and wondering how to connect with the viewers, because it's not just necessarily the ecosystem of the game or the game development, but the people who are engaging with the game by watching others play it because they either can't afford it or I don't know, I'm someone who likes watching games more than necessarily playing them on my own, and getting that commentary of someone who is playing it, and that element and how we can bring that into this conversation as well and engage them, especially from the perspective of Ocean Decade because of Challenge 10 and changing people's perceptions about the ocean. So bringing in people who might not even know about the Ocean Decade from streaming platforms without them being the streamer, and if there's any discussion going on in that realm.
Yeah, we do that all the time in terms of education. We even bring in, what is called typically influencers, but people actually who are not necessarily immediately involved with education. We have pro NFL quarterbacks, we have celebrities, but we're surrounding it with a purpose, a specific message. And then it has sort of this network effect. It has this growth pattern, which is extraordinary, where we can grow a community and people are watching this individual comment on something very positive, and we'll go from anywhere around 100 people to as many as 6,000 was our last server, our core server, 9,000 in just a matter of days, with 75% of those individuals being active all the time around that messaging. So it's very much about also the viewer in the community as much as it is the participant who's playing the game.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for the next question.
I want to just add, I think what is also unique to this conversation is strides in the K through 12 space. And this is a lot of times where the gamers start. You know, they're very young. And what we showed with the Ocean Vision Minecraft game is this isn't for us a one-off. This is going to be embedded within our curriculum for all 200,000 of our students to engage in. And we're looking at gaming as an opportunity to give students an option on how they learn and how they engage in their learning. They can go to their general core textbook and read about the oceans and how they can impact it, or they can opt to go into the Minecraft world and engage in the learning that way. And they become immersed and they engage in a different way. And so for us, it's not a one-off. It is changing the way we want students to have the opportunity to learn. And if they immerse in that learning, they're still going to get the same core concept that they have to meet all of our lovely state standards, but they're also going to come away more aware and they're going to want more. And as we build more and more games, we want them to learn core content, but we also want them to come back and learn more, to level up, to learn at that deeper level within the game. But because we're putting it where they learn, we're rising above a noise that they probably were already tired of hearing. We have people that they don't want to read the traditional textbooks anymore. They want this other opportunity. And so we're using this as an opportunity to engage kids in a different way in learning.
Thank you.
Can I add one comment to that? Because I think that last question was really valuable.
Alan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to, people spend almost as much time watching games as playing games now. And when we talk to youth, many of them want to not only be game makers, many want to be streamers on YouTube or Twitch. It's a very interesting thing. And to cultivate a generation of streamers who know the art of streaming, and it is an art, and designing games that are streamer friendly is an art, is I think something that is underutilized towards these impact goals. And so I think it's a really good thing to put on the table and to think about. When we release an indie game, independent game, two things drive sales more than anything else. The placement on the e-store, whether it's Android, Apple, Steam, Epic, PlayStation, and a streamer picking up the game. Dramatic, more than a New York Times feature will drive sales. So it's interesting to really understand the streaming ecosystem. It was a great question.
Thank you. Very good. We have a great audience, in fact. Leslie, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. First, I've got to really appreciate this, and I have a personal interest in it. I'm not a gamer, but I have a son who is turning himself into a game designer. And it's just lovely to watch, and the potential impact is amazing. So I wanted to thank you. And I've been voice recording. I hope you've actually recorded the whole thing.
It is recorded in public.
Wonderful. So he'll get to see that. And then you really concerned me with the blockbuster movies. Yes, the lowest common denominator. Yes, that's where the money is. But there's good old PBS. And I'm wondering, is anybody trying to outreach in that way, or shall we count on the kids streaming, you know, the good content? How do we rise above again? That might be great.
And I don't want to say, first of all, I mean, it is possible to do a Hollywood movie that does science. I think Interstellar is actually a pretty good example. It doesn't always do it accurately, but it's an interesting negotiation of science and art that we can all learn from. But I think that you're right. Like PBS has long done, for instance, like really interesting science fiction programming and obviously really interesting science programming. Again, it's a matter of short form versus long form and economics, I think, more than anything else. In long form, you can take the time to really like dive into the science and dramatize the human problem solving, right? But the trick with the Hollywood movie is it's 120 minutes long. Well, if it's a Marvel movie, it's like 300 minutes long. But my point is, even if it is a Marvel movie, you're looking at 90 pages of script to maybe 150 pages of script, and a lot of that's visual cues. It's hard to get a lot of information out. So I think you're right that looking at other mediums, streaming platforms like science fiction on streaming often, I think, actually grapples more with science. If anyone's watching The Expanse, for instance, they do a lot of dramatizing of scientific problem solving on that show, with all in the context of a galaxy spanning, you know, war. It's very exciting. So can bring those two things together for sure.
Thank you. How many questions do we still have? Because we are running out of time. I can only take one more. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hi, Andrea Bertoli, Ohio State University, and I am a coral reef scientist. And in the STRIDE preview that you showed, there was inaccuracy in the content. You would never remove dead coral before replanting, for example. And so I'm deeply concerned with if you're putting yourself in the education space, how are you ensuring your content is accurate? The content you presented might encourage a kid or their parents, when they're on holiday, to start picking up dead coral thinking they're doing the right thing, when in fact they're making the problem worse by doing so. Thank you.
I really appreciate that call out, and we will go back to the developers. We had some scientists that actually worked with us on developing it, so I'm a little shocked that that wasn't caught, but thank you so much for pulling it out, and we will go back and look at that.
Right, but this just raises the point that there could be millions of those little things embedded in there, because you would need an expert in every aspect of what you're presenting in just that short clip in order to make sure it was scientific.
And I think that this is one of the point of doing this gaming ecosystem under the decade, is to really entrain that knowledge base from a multi-sector group of researchers and people that are working in the field, so that we can provide good content for this platform.
And also for kids under the age of 8, the research shows that they learn much better from people than from a screen. So I'm wondering why you would want to try and expand into that space when evidence-based learning shows that's not the best platform for learning. Older kids can handle that, but younger kids don't integrate that information the same way as if they learn it from a person.
Again, thank you for your comment. I think we're seeing both. We are seeing a lot of the youth begin to engage in the gaming, but we start a lot of our stuff at that 6th and 7th grade space and move it upward.
I want to thank you all again for being here and for engaging in this conversation, you know, across the aisle. We're hoping that this is just a seed planting of something to come, where we really, you know, create an ecosystem where we could do all these things together and do the best we can. We are going to transition. You can stay here. We're going to transition to our last phase of this segment, which is going to be led by Ted Giannoulis, who is the CEO and founder of Investable Ocean. But today he's going to represent the Explorer Club and a new initiative about launching a competition for students. So I'm just going to give it to you.
Thank you so much, Manu, and thanks. I learned so much today. This was just an incredible panel. I am here on behalf of the Explorers Club, which is a science and research-based organization headquartered in New York City with members around the world. We do have our president online, who just disappeared. I think he'll come back, Richard Garriott. And interestingly, Richard is not just the president of the club, he was also a leading light in the whole development of the gaming industry. So he's especially passionate about it. And the way we ended up here, while we get my colleagues back, is that we do a thing called World Oceans Week every year. We're doing our 7th one. This year in June, we bracketed around World Oceans Day, and we're looking for ways to engage. And we were thinking about hackathons and different things along those lines, and Linwood Pendleton said, you should really go over to GEOS, which we belong to anyway, which is related to Ocean Visions, and you should really meet Karen Godoti and the people from Stride. So we all got together, we hacked around the table, and we came up with an idea that something that we could get done this year and print something, get it done in time. You'll hear about it in just 1 second. And so what I would say about what we've done so far is 3 things. One is it's highly collaborative, and it's one more time of Manu in the middle. He's like Sting or Madonna. He just needs one name there. But to bring everybody together like that and to think about what can we do together, that collaboration is critical. The second piece is it's just the first step of a journey. So we designed something that we thought we could execute based on Stride's expertise and the people that we had involved. We thought we could get something done this year. So it's really just a first step, and who knows where the future can go. So the third step is an invitation to all of you to come join us. And you'd like to get involved in this, and when you see what we're doing now and you think you can add things to it, we are all open to new ideas. And so we're thrilled to have met Stride. We're so appreciative to Manu and team. And here are some of the colleagues. So without any further ado, Richard, I mentioned you were president of the club and a leading light in the early days of the gaming industry. So we'll start with you, and then Kevin Murphy will take us through a little bit about the gaming.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Ted, and hello to everybody down there, down at Georgia Tech. I've spent many years down there at Dragon Cons and things nearby that I've really enjoyed. But as Ted mentioned, I'm the current president of the Explorers Club. You know, for those of you who've not heard of it, for the last 120 years, the Explorers Club has really been the premier association of professional explorers around the globe. Our members and our flag has been over that 120 years, you know, some of the first on some of the first great expeditions into the unknown. Our members were the first to the North Pole, the first to the South Pole, the first to the top of Everest, the first to the bottom of the deepest point in the ocean, and even the first people and most of the people who went to the moon were also members of the Explorers Club. But in addition, you know, why I'm especially proud to be here today is, as Ted mentioned, I'm one of the early founders of the computer gaming industry. I created a series of games that some of you gray-haired gamers might know, a series of games called Ultima. That's where the term avatar comes from. That's become ubiquitous in the industry, as well as the category of MMOs is one that I helped kick off. And through my 45 years of game development, one of the things that became very clear very early on, but it became more and more powerful and true over time, was how game environments are uniquely and inherently great platforms for building deep understanding of issues through participation, and the powerful interaction that ultimately, you know, makes games a uniquely powerful platform for teaching and for learning. And so that's why, for at least in my case, I think it's a great privilege to be here representing the Explorers Club and helping launch this partnership with Stride to get gamers to game creators, the young creators, to help us in building out the next great underwater base for the world's greatest explorers. So to pass it over to tell you more detail about the kind of the challenge that we're laying, I'll either pass it back to Ted or straight over to Kevin, as you guys might want to roll next.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, straight over to you, please, Kevin.
Sure. Can you hear me, Ted?
Yep.
Yeah, so we're going to do the Build the Next Great Underwater Base. As Ted had explained and some of what Richard explained, the Explorers Club World Oceans Week is founded alongside the UN with World Oceans Day. So early on, we hosted kids from marine world heritage sites around the world with the UN, and we started to do some early education programs, but we've really been ramping up over the last few years, is also what Joe will speak about here. But part of what we wanted to do is sort of engage people on the platforms where they're at different constituency levels. So we have the world's greatest explorers who give TED Talk style talks. We come in and we do all sorts of workshops. But we found gaming as a platform a really interesting way to engage a lot of these sort of age groups that you're talking about, which is also a lot of the interesting question that you guys got from the audience of sort of engaging people where they're at and the importance of sort of YouTube, Twitch, streaming, and how all that works. A lot of what we deal in is cultural capital. So cultural capital in the exploration realm, a lot of that is sort of what have you done, what mountain you climbed, and what you're all about in exploration shops. And a lot of what kids, and the answer I think I saw Alan give and sort of like teetering around the world influencer, is just we deal with authenticity. So we found gaming, more than anything else, generates a large degree of authenticity within that constituency that we're looking to connect with. So we're doing sort of a connection of 8 to 12-year-olds and then probably about a 13 to 15-year-old. As they said, it's build the next great underwater base. So the Explorers Club and exploration has a huge history in underwater environments. I know everybody knows the Cousteaus. We were actually supposed to have Joe Dutori, the chapter chair of our Florida chapter, here on Zoom, but he just couldn't join us. He's 22 feet underwater in an underwater habitat right now off the coast of Florida, and he's going to be there for 100 days. I think he's on day 47. So there's a long history of underwater bases, and in the parameters we've laid out, we're looking for kids to be as creative as possible. All we're really looking to do is for them to generate at least one dry area and a provided underwater server. So Karen and the folks from Stride are going to provide a flat underwater server for them, and we'll provide grid areas for them to build in, and we're going to let them build the next great underwater base. We don't want them to necessarily feel like it has to be attached to the ground, so it could be a submersible or all sorts of different things. And we're also looking for it to incorporate some depiction of marine life. We're probably, at least for the older age group, going to put some block restrictions on so that it has to at least deal with the coral tile set or the seagrass tile set or something they're in. So we're just refining some of the last details, but by the by, we're looking to get as creative as possible. And we're going to do that on a school night in groups of 1 to 2 off of Karen's expertise that we don't want to alienate any kids if they only have themselves to engage with. But if they want to play with a partner, they can do it with a partner. And obviously there's all sorts of levels of Minecraft itself. So I see in the chat, people are talking about Minecraft Education Edition. So we're deferential to Karen sort of on what version what and how it works. But from our standpoint, what we're looking to do is have people get creatively engaged in a space we're in, which is underwater exploration. Everybody's always wanted to build a base. Anybody who plays Minecraft builds a base anyway. And on top of that, it also feeds into a huge education program we're doing about underwater habitats and different individuals who spend a long history underwater. So that's what we're looking to build. And Karen and the team from Stride have been wonderful to us, both on site when we announce it on, I believe, June 7th is when we're going to announce as part of World Oceans Week. On site, our headquarters is a museum to exploration. So we'll have an installation where guests will be able to go through the creative world, which we'll save so they can see all our kids' builds. And then we'll probably have another station where guests will be able to interact with Stride's larger ambitious project that they've told you all about and the marine habitat they're building. So we'll have a double exhibit on site. We're going to announce the winner, and then we'll also probably produce some video and social content around it. And to the point of questions that were asked as we grow into next year, I think some of our larger strategies are around exactly what Alan was talking about and the individual and the audience is talking about, is incorporating much more of our own individuals with cultural capacity and also within the gaming community, because I think those are really great questions. And there's a lot of really interesting ways we can integrate, especially now with like COD and Fortnite and the way season passes work and the way monetization strategies work within games themselves. There's a lot of ways they're constantly looking to churn out content. And frankly, everything you guys do is really cool content, so long as it's framed the correct way. So even within the monetization strategies that are emerging within the games themselves, there's a million different ways we're finding we can incorporate at the club. And it's really interesting to hear how all of you are working on that as well. And as Ted said, please join us at the Explorers Club for World Oceans Week, June 4th through 9th.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we're going to turn it over to Joe Grabowski from Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And you might say they have such amazing reach at Stride. Why would we have, we were going to turn it to him. Why do we reach out to another group? But we believe in what we first heard from Lonely Whale described as radical collaboration. So never too many folks involved. In case we can't get him back, I'm just going to say quickly, he goes into, last year we went into 1,000 classrooms around World Oceans Day, and we're going to use that distribution on top of Stride's distribution to reach as many students as possible and engage as many as possible. And then I want to turn it over to Karen to wrap us up, because I see Manu beginning to come on stage. We want to get you all on the road also. But Karen, thank you.
Absolutely. We're excited about this partnership with the Explorers Club, and we are launching it on our website to have a QR code that will go straight to that website. We'll actually announce the challenge on the day during World Oceans Weeks. We'll put up the parameters for the challenge that Kevin just laid out and work with students across the country to build the next great underwater base. We're excited about it. Thank you.
And thanks all of you for listening. We'll be here afterwards if people want to talk more. Manu, thank you so much.
And thank you for all of you, especially that stayed until the end. Thank you again for all these panelists. And again, like every new thing that we're trying to do, there's going to be some miss and some successes, and we just have to be patient and continue to be constructive. Gaming is not the answer to everything, but it's definitely something that we should explore under the decade because there's no other group that is doing it right now. And as you know, many people are reached by games. So thank you again, everyone. And finally, this is over. This is the last event of the summit. Eat your lunch and enjoy.